Today's guest is James de Lacey. James is a strength coach who's worked in professional rugby and combat sports. He's the owner of the Sweet Science of Fighting platform and podcast. On the show today, we talk all things dynamic and alive strength training for athletes, from flywheels and eccentrics to oscillatory reps to Olympic lifts. We cover movement quality, rhythm, and fluidity, this and much more. It was awesome talking to James. Let's get on to the show. James, welcome to the show, man. I'm excited to have you on. I know I've enjoyed our last couple of conversations on your podcast and looking forward to what we have to chat about today here.
No, I appreciate you having me on here. You've had a lot of colleagues, friends, mentors and stuff on your podcast, so it's cool to be able to jump on this one and chat.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of overlap. One of the things that I want to get into is you have strong Olympic lifting background, and it's always interesting to
by strong, we're talking like New Zealand national standards. So we'll say strong is relative.
Yeah, relative to the average. Let's say the average strength coach or gym goer. I would say you have a strong Olympic lifting background, or strong compared to people who say don't do Olympic lifts and do all these alternatives instead. But how does that land for you with coaching athletes? Like, how does that? Where is that level of Olympic lifting landed when it comes to actually being in a gym with a non-Olympic lifting population?
So actually so if we go to rugby, where I spent most of my career in, and now obviously a little bit in combat sports, I didn't use them that much in rugby. And a lot of that was, sometimes it was depending on the level of the team and athlete. Often it was equipment. So like I remember at one point we were training for European champs. We were training out of a shoebox. Basically, we had 2 barbells for a team. So, at that point, you're not going to have any kind of weightlifting done in that instance. But if or when I do weightlifting, I really like the pull variations. Those are kind of like my go-to now, especially within combat sports like grapplers and things. High pull was probably my favorite variation of all of them, just because you have that, you're supporting, like, for example, like a snatch high pull, you're supporting heavy loads, you're having to maintain positions over the bar, and then you're having this like violent extension pulling it vertically. And if you actually look at, like, if you have, for example, standing, you got someone's back for a mat return, those hips coming in becomes really important, plus you're just strengthening the upper back on top of it. So it ends up being a really nice exercise to use. I actually used a bit of that with the first rugby team I was with a while ago off the pins. So like fast, clean pulls off the pins. But outside of that, I'll just do a lot of throws, jumps, like kind of like what a lot of people will talk about. It's nothing new. Throws, jumps, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not against Olympic weightlifting at all. Funnily enough, I know a lot of people like to teach the clean. I found snatch variations tend to be easier on the shoulders for a lot of athletes, like especially in rugby and stuff. So I'm quite fond of like various snatch variations too. And they're not actually that easier to learn than the clean variation, because the front rack's so difficult for so many people. Yeah. So if you're teaching like a power snatch from like the hip or the hang, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to teach a power clean and power clean from the hang or from the hip. So yeah, that kind of, hopefully that answers that.
For sure. Yeah. It seems like the argument or thought of, okay, well, just get strong and then do all the sprints, throws, jumps, which I actually think that's a pretty decent argument at its core. But then the next piece in there, like, is Olympic lift from a block, is a lot simpler. It's almost a lot more like a medicine ball throw in some respects, at least the terminal phase, versus learning the coordination of the whole thing. So yeah, but the blocks are always not easy to come by. I know a lot of prescriptions I put out, a lot of times people don't have blocks, and it's like, hey, I'm in my gym and I just used the power rack and I did a block pull from the power rack, and that's great, but there's something different knowing you can't just throw it down. I don't know what it is like,
and it feels different too, because the power rack holds the bar, whereas the blocks hold the plates. So the slacks, you have no slack.
Yeah.
So it just makes it way harder.
That is true. It's like it's less alive. Like when it's blocks, you kind of pick it up and you feel that little bend, and there's something. Yeah. There's something to that. I think it is. I'm glad we're talking about this, because I do like getting into like the sensory, like those subtle sensory things that you wouldn't outright talk about, but I think they make a big difference.
Yeah, well, that's why people look. Well, not why. One reason, like a deadlift bar, right? You're going to deadlift far more with a deadlift bar because it has huge flex. So if you're trying to do heavy pulls off a power rack, you don't have any of that flex. It's like lifting with like an axle at that point because there's just no bend. So it's just like it's a dead weight. Whereas off the blocks, you have that little bit of slack and you have that little bit of flex, and you use that to help set your positions.
Yeah.
You know, versus having that dead weight you're trying to work around.
Yeah, it kind of gives you like, yeah, having that little flex, it gives your body a little time to settle. It's almost like those little subtle options too to kind of sneak into different positions and things. It just feels good. So yeah, definitely a fan of that. I wish I had a block pull set up here. I will say I tend to if I don't have blocks, I prefer not to. Yeah, if I had to go into a rack, I would probably just not do it. But what I end up
Yeah,
doing a lot of times.
and you bend the bars.
Yeah, well, it's like something gets broken because back at Cal, we piled up plyo boxes, and they were older plyo boxes. You know, I mean, they were. It's not like, hey, we just got these plyo boxes, but that's what it was. Our blocks were for Olympic lifts and pulls and stuff, and we did the vast majority. I don't think we ever pulled from the floor outside of my first few years at with track, and even then, we tried not to a large part of the time. But especially once I got going with swimming and some of the postures there, which are just not designed to pressurize off the ground really well, it was all blocks. But I felt it was just interesting because I'm pretty sure some of those jump boxes, I'm like, you just see people throw it down on the jump boxes, and it's like,
And they're not reinforced for that.
these are becoming more power clean racks than they are jump boxes in reality, and they still function for jump boxes, but and that's kind of what my go-to, my workaround has mostly been, is if I ever have a place to do that, it's usually get the jump boxes over. I've only maybe used actual blocks a couple times. Yeah.
Well, I bought the old UT baseball blocks on auction, so they're in my garage. So I've got I've got jerk blocks in there that I got on a good deal. They're damn heavy though, but and then at the weights from gym we've got blocks there. But I've been doing, since we actually chatted a couple of weeks ago, I've been starting to do more high block work as well, just trying to get that faster turnover. But damn, the high block stuff is nice just because, I mean, if we're related to sports performance instead of weightlifting, which might be better for your audience as well. But if we like talk like impulse, you know, going from the floor versus going from the blocks, there's a massive difference in the time you have to generate that force, like huge. And if anyone's ever done like high block cleans or snatches versus from the floor, like it's almost like a mind fuck when you first start from the high blocks, because you're like, how am I going to do anything from this position? Because you feel like you have no space to go. But you figure it out, and you're having to just generate high impulse in these very short time frames. And it's like, you know, what are you going to do in sport? A lot of it is constrained by time. So it just kind of gives you like another option to work around any of your kind of high rate of force development work as well.
Yeah, one of my favorite variations that I wouldn't say, I haven't been able to use it much lately because most of my training is in my garage setup and I don't have blocks and I don't have an Olympic lifting kit. But it's one that I've been prescribing way more. And every time I do it, I love it. But it's like a high block split catch clean. And it is so good because it's like you said, you're usually starting in a pretty advantageous position. So some of the technical pieces are reduced if that's an issue. And it's also better for people who might lack the space to get down to the floor well. But so it's like fast impulse, and then the split catch, it's more reactive and a little more athletic feeling for a lot of people. Than the
It can be easier as well, like mobility restrictions and stuff. Like you don't have to worry about any of that.
100%. I mean, there's a lot of athletes who actually would do a lot better with a split catch. Even just outside of like, you know, single leg and speed and whatnot. I found some athletes just respond better to that. Like I've done experience with like a toe touch test and things like or whatever biofeedback, you know, do a regular catch, do a split catch. It just seems to in the moment be a little bit better from a biofeedback. But I just like, for me, it's just, I don't do those types of little tests, those little neurological tests. I just like, that felt good. I'll just do bounce around, do a little bit of sprint stride, bounce around after. I'm like, yeah, it feels good. Okay, we'll do more of that. That's my barometer. Yeah, that's definitely where I've landed for sure with those higher ones. And it is interesting too, because you get that, like, what is weird to me is when you get no like real counter movement, because usually the bar will start at least like above the kneecaps and you can pull it up the thighs a few inches, and then you get that roll in. But if it's like sitting there in the power position and you don't get anything, it
Mm.
is a little confusing for a moment. You're like, you want to do some sort of little pre-bend, you want
Yeah.
to. So I usually set up so there's like a few inches you can roll. But yeah, where you set it real high where there's nothing, it's like, it's like it's a puzzle. So you sit
Mm.
there like, wait, what has to go to make this bar go?
It forces you to pull yourself under, which is if anyone does like actual weightlifting, that's
Yeah.
often a technical place where it goes wrong, where they'll pull fast or whatever to the hip, then they kind of make contact and they just like dive under the bar versus finishing it and pulling themselves under. And that difference, like it makes a huge difference, like technically. And it's going to also be a faster lift too. And you're going to be able to lift more weight. So it's all a good thing for sports performance.
Yeah, without question. It's oscillatory in nature too, in a way. We talk about oscillatory
Mm.
training, and that was actually the next question I had for you. But there's like that's one of those movements that it forces it. It's like a constraint that forces some level of switch
Yeah,
up.
it's almost like a pseudo activation relaxation kind of thing. Just because you have to be I mean, weightlifting has it. No, it's not to the same extent as like faster cyclical actions, like maybe looking at sprint
Yeah.
cycling, sprinting, and stuff like that. But it's there. Like you have to push to the top and pull yourself under, and the only way to facilitate that speed is to have some kind of relaxation going. But anyways, I interrupted your question.
Oh no, all good. I wanted to ask a little bit about, and I think that you've worked in both rugby and then fighting and combat sports. It's interesting because I think about oscillatory training, and any modality that's not, well, really any modality, not just any modality that's not normal, but any modality can be taken to an extreme where you might see a workout video and it's all these crazy oscillations and it's like,
Mm.
it seems a little out there. But then just like baseline oscillatory training, I know it was Graham Morris, I believe, who was talking about oscillatory
Mm.
work and showing up in kicking power. And yeah, I'm curious where like oscillatory contract relax type work, how do you use it? Like what are some exercise modes that you will utilize it for? And then, yeah, rugby versus fighting or any other athlete population. Do you feel like there's populations where it lands the best and in its use?
I can give one major example I used a lot. I had like an isometric hamstring progression in rugby, and that's mainly because of the constraints we had within our scheduling. So we had the gym in the morning and we had field in the afternoon. So there's no way in hell in the morning I'm doing whatever heavy RDLs and whatever else, and then having to sprint in the afternoon. So I had this isometric hamstring progression I went through. I didn't know it was an oscillatory iso at the time. I just called it like a pulse, but it was basically a single leg hamstring glute ham raise isometric, I guess you'd call it. And I'd just have them pulse up and down. So it's almost like, I guess, I mean, yeah, it's like an oscillatory isometric, just having the body go up and down with the hamstrings. That would be the main way I've used it in terms of oscillatory specifically. Outside of that, and if we're talking like activation, relaxation stuff, I mean, I know Mike Schofield referenced it in your podcast a little while ago around, it's a really cool paper. It's by Tang and Martin, I think it was in 2019. And they took an old, oh fuck, I can't say his name properly, Hakkinen. Oh, I probably said it
Oh,
completely
that
wrong.
sounds about right with some of the Finnish researchers and stuff.
Yeah, like an old 1985 paper. So what they did, honestly, if anyone's listening and they want to like kind of expand some of their strength training stuff outside of like the traditional lifting. So that original paper, they took 24 weeks of squatting 3 times a week, and they were doing 70 to 100% 1RM plus eccentric overload. And then they were essentially showing what came out the other end. Okay, they had obviously huge increases in strength and maximal isometric strengths, but their relaxation, I think it was in that one, relaxation kinetics weren't so great. So what this paper did in 2019 is they took the exact same methodology, but tacked on an explosive training group as a comparison. So they had the squat group 3 times a week versus they called it like an explosive group, which was basically the same 3 times a week, but it was like jumps, drop jumps, weighted jumps, just your typical ballistic stuff.
Yeah.
And then they modeled it based on frequency. So slow, moderate, and then like fast cyclical actions. And fast cyclical action was about, I estimated from that was about 180, 190 RPMs if you're on a bike. And I think it comes around to around 150 milliseconds of time to produce force in the positive or concentric phase. The middle was about 300 milliseconds. But you could see on the graph, the groups that just did the heavy strength training, they basically have to break earlier and during that positive power portion of the cyclical action. And then they have this huge amount of like unrealized work underneath. So essentially it's like their relaxation or their ability to relax is stopping them from being able to produce more power each time the cycle comes around. So it kind of comes back to this idea that, I mean, it's not really, I'm not going to say it's not common, but there's a huge emphasis and bias on like maximal strength training. Like you just need to get as strong as possible. Maximal strength underpins every quality that you have in your training, but to a certain extent, it doesn't. Because, I mean, even as some of those papers show, as the time frame gets shorter, you only have a certain amount of time to produce force, and just having more maximal strength isn't going to get you there. And in some instances, if it becomes a really emphasized or prioritized quality, it can lead to some kind of negative adaptations. Now, I'm not saying that you're squatting every week heavy and then doing your sport and then suddenly, you got problems. But I think when people start to get really carried away with what they're doing in the gym and it's all based around bigger numbers, then you could potentially start, well, at least if when you're past kind of that beginner intermediate stage, right? You could potentially start to run into these issues. But it's really interesting phenomenon idea that, that a lot of cyclical power actions are kind of constrained by the relaxation period and not by like how much horsepower you're putting down. And so then it kind of begs the question of, what's the trade-off in training? Like, what are we trying to achieve? Are there certain sports that may be better skewed to having maybe less of that in there? Like, as an example, I mean, you mentioned between the different sports. So I kind of see combat sports and rugby are so similar in so many aspects in training. And I used to group my players based on positions. Like backs, they would be more kind of like quote unquote track athlete-esque in terms of their training, where it's kind of more speed based. Then I would have like the tight five, which would be kind of like the front rows and locks, and that would be more kind of like strength based. And then my loose forwards or back rows would be kind of more like a hybrid of both. Combat sports, you can always group similar. Like grapplers on one end, you just have like this huge force component. They can run powerlifting bodybuilding splits and probably be okay. On the striking end, you have like that real high velocity component where potentially, because like this activation, relaxation, kinetics, you may not be, at a certain point, you may not be hitting them with a ton of volume of maximal strength work. Then MMA, you might find somewhere in the middle, depending on the athlete and all sorts of stuff. So it kind of reframes a lot of maybe the training around, is a quote unquote hypertrophy or maximal strength phase going to help, say, a certain boxer? Obviously, it's athlete dependent too, but is that going to help, or at least help prepare them for the sport? Where in boxing, for example, you have fast cyclical actions when you're throwing combinations. Because if you think about, you're throwing a right hand, the shoulder turns, you're throwing the left hand, the shoulder turns again, and you have this constant rotation of cyclical actions that you need to be able to do. And it's just benching, squatting more, whatever, is that going to help facilitate a lot of those actions, which, just for some it will, but eventually it may not.
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think Hammer Strength. Weighted vests have been a staple in athletic performance for decades, but the next generation in wearable resistance is found in light micro loads placed on the limbs of the body. The leader in micro-loading and wearable resistance is Exogen Gear by Lila. Exogen is used by the top track and field and sports performance coaches in the world, and it provides a level of angular velocity training and potentiation that is second to none. If you want 20% off of Exogen Gear by Lila, then head to lilateam.com, that's lilateam.com, and use the code JustFly20. That's JustFly20 for 20% off your order. Grab your Exogen Gear today and see the difference in your training. Yeah, the question I'm always thinking of is, when I think about this partly with like, you look at the animal kingdom and in terms of like people whose relaxation or beings, animals whose relaxation cycles are not slowing them down. You watch a dog chasing, a rabbit or something. Any chase in nature, you're seeing complete disinhibition. You're not seeing brakes on, and it's like as humans, we have. How did we get these brakes on? Yeah, I guess the question is if you have something that's more movement perfection, or like, have you ever seen a little bit random. People send me this every now and then. It's like that dog relay race. It's like the dogs are jumping over the hurdles, and then there's like a little dog, and it's like just two-stepping like these 1-foot hurdles that are like 15 feet apart or something. I mean, it's just insane how well these animals move, and it's just perfection. I'm like, this dog needs zero training outside of doing this. And so where I'm going with it is I always think. I think sometimes any modality that's more like neurological and movement quality oriented, in the weight room at least, I always think what are the requirements of the sport? Like as you mentioned with like striking or things that are a little bit faster, like even faster, contract, relax. So like what is the sport demand? But then two, like what should an athlete be able to self-organize on their own just by throwing and sprinting and changing directions, jumping and hopefully, in my opinion, maybe doing some dancing in their free time, like, things that are kind of rhythmic and a little disinhibiting.
Have you noticed a lot of really good athletes are really good dancers too?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that are fluid too. A lot of times the ones that are just fluid gamers on the field. Like, there was there's a video of Baker Mayfield dancing when he was at Oklahoma or something recently. I don't know if you saw that. I was like,
no.
That I feel like sometimes I think you just see people's like confidence in those things too. I think, part of the recruiting profile, they run people through all these like medical tests and things like that is if they dug up any videos of people dancing at like, college events or something, I think there's something there too. But anyways, just a tangent. That's something I think about is that how much of the like oscillatory training and I like I'll have to try the glute ham thing you were mentioning. I was going to say the one
that was really good.
Yeah, and that's the thing is if it feels good, like if you do it and it feels good, like that's the barometer in so many ways, shapes, and forms. A lot of them look a little bit odd, but that was like for me the one that I always used for sprinting was oscillatory isometric split squat. So rear foot elevated usually because that's the way the DB Hammer system had it. But you could do it just regular on the ground too, but just be like a lunge position, grab weights, create some tension, relax and bounce out of the bottom. And I found that to be really helpful for myself when I was first using it. Like my runway speed increased substantially on triple jumping. And then Sheldon Dunlap, who was on this podcast a long time ago, he did a lot of oscillatory work and he did the triphasic program, the eccentric, isometric, and concentric, but he replaced the eccentric with oscillatories. And it's similar about how everyone's runways, where everyone's strides were just getting huge. And so that would say, okay, well, maybe, this is jumpers. These are athletes who are already doing plyos. They're doing strength. So that intermediary did something. That was beneficial. So that was always the one I thought was helpful. And then, I want to try that glute ham. But yeah, my question always is thinking, you never want to have too noisy of a program either. So, how does that all fit with that? It's almost like every coach should have at least something that's oscillatory just to feel and see how athletes are moving afterwards, just because there's that explosive rhythm. So I'm
No, you're good. You're good. It's like for example for that hamstring one, that would be one out of the 2 days of training, that would be one movement. That would be considered, I guess, under the oscillatory isometric umbrella.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot. I mean, that's a pretty intense one though, because you're like you're almost like fast eccentric braking that hamstring every time you kind of pulse. So it's a relatively intense variation, that specific one. But that's kind of, I guess that's kind of where I've landed on it. I wouldn't say I have huge experience programming a bunch more. So I don't want to go too much further into that. But you mentioned as well, like athletes that float and play. And there's this one particular exercise that I found that the players that look like they're floating on the field do this so well, and it's a Bosch variation. And people listening probably like, "Oh, this motherfucker."
You said that's what you get about 2/3 of the people who are like, "Oh," and the third of the people thinking something else. That's all good.
And maybe more likes on the podcast, but no, but this particular version I really like, and it's the I don't know how to explain it. Oh, maybe when this comes out, I'll repost on my Instagram so people can see it. But it's it's like an upper lower dissociation exercise, which, in my opinion, just from observations, I think that is almost like one of the keys for athleticism.
Yeah.
Like, full stop. Because you get guys that come from strength sports into combat sports or other sports, and they can't move. And you've gained adaptations that are very important for strength sports, like having that rigid spine and like almost like that pelvis stack, or ribs packed over the pelvis. But for sport, that's not exactly a recipe for fluid movement. But this particular exercise, it's like, so let's say you have your left foot, like, say you have a plate on the ground to make it really easy, and typically you have a landmine with the bar standing up, and you have your left foot on the right side of the plate, and then the bar on the left side of your body. So you have this almost like stretch across the body, and then you're essentially whipping the bar across and then switching your feet to the other side and switching back. I'm sure people might have seen variations of it, but just from observation, the ones that can do that, like, they look like they float on the field when they have the ball in hand, and there's obviously no science or anything to back that up. It's just purely eyeballs. But it's interesting. So, because I think, like, just from that, I'm like, man, it's just that ability to be able to, like, rapidly, like, dissociate up the upper and lower body and be able to do so many different things. Like, it's kind of like one of the, I guess, what you call, like, one of the attractors of kind of running, at least in team sports. I mean, this is a huge influence from John Pryor. I was lucky enough to learn kind of from him at that game conference, but kind of like that, being able to do something with the upper body while maintaining speed with the lower body, having that option. So we do a lot of different stuff around that as well, but I think we might touch on that a bit later, so I'll leave it at that.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember when all that stuff was coming out, I was having some athletes work with that. But unfortunately for me, I had stopped working with track at Cal and moved. I saw a big opportunity with swimming. So I was like, all right, I want to learn something new. I want to get into swimming. So here I am with 3 aquatics teams. And the dissociation is still, if you're a long axis person like backstroke and freestyle, it's more of a big deal than short axis for sure. But and I was doing some of that work just to fill in some auxiliaries, to be honest, at the time. It's like, all right, here's some cool stuff to try and do. And so we were doing some of those items. And I think from just a health perspective, honestly, even if you're a short axis, like a flyer and breaststroke athlete, just having some dissociation ability is just good for you. It's just a healthy thing to have. And I'm sure they're doing some freestyle, they all do freestyle anyways. But yeah, my version, I'm glad you brought that up though, because my version that I kind of came up with after really kind of selectively forgetting those exercises, I'm glad you reminded me, is I like to have athletes hold a medicine ball. Like, they'll hug it into their chest. And I like that because it has to be like a bigger one, usually, like the bigger, like the softer ones, like the old school ones. Not like you get the new one off Amazon. It's just like hard ounces. That's great. But like, it's got to be something that you feel, and it feels like part of you. And then I'll have athletes do just that. They'll do like a high lunge switch.
Yeah.
They have to turn their whole upper torso in opposition. And it's so interesting, because so often athletes who don't float on the field, like you mentioned, they want to, like, what you need to do is, if your right knee's in front, the ball needs to be to the right of your right knee, because that's how the shoulder works when you sprint. But athletes who tend not to float well or move that well, they want to set up the opposite way almost every time. They want to set up with the ball just in the middle. They don't really know where the ball should go. And you tell them, but they still forget a lot, because they just don't have that. I don't necessarily like saying switching in the air, because it's a very trendy thing to say, switching in the air, but it is organization in the air. That coordination is a lot more demanding than organization on the ground or with feet grounded. And the ability to basically have that dissociation happen aerially is the ultimate. So that's where, I just kind of, I don't know if I took that exercise from somebody. I know some people were doing medicine ball runs, like Austin Yoakum and some others were just running with the medicine ball, and I loved it. James up at T3, guys who've been on the show, but like, and I think I was having people do that, and I found athletes who struggled to run with the medicine ball, which you have to dissociate to hug it around your chest and run well. I guess I would think about rugby too, right? Like, right, if you're holding a rugby ball, or like kind of like Do rugby, do you ever hold it with two hands? Or is that just the running back in American football? So
So, that's definitely American football. I mean, you can do that. Some do that go into contact, but it's very rare. But you mentioned as well about that kind of medicine ball one. So I stole from Vern I guess it would be a regression of that.
Yeah.
Like a power lunge and lean. So like the medicine ball out in front, and as you step forward, you kind of rotate over, and it's like continuous, and then the same thing overhead and lean. Those two, I use those in warm-ups all the time. They're great. They feel really good. And then on top of that, you mentioned was sprinting with a medicine ball. So more stuff I've stolen from John Pryor from that time. Like we would do like halo acceleration runs. So again, I mean, that's like the super advanced one. I was like, oh, fuck it, we're going to do it. Like, I just want to see what it looks like. So we have like a 5 kg plate and then have the plate above the head. And again, the same thing. The guys who float on the field did this really well, where you would accelerate 10, 20 meters, but you'd have the plate haloing around your head while you're accelerating.
Interesting.
So again, it's the upper body perturbation, upper body doing something, but you're having to maintain the speed essentially in the straight line. And if anyone's wondering kind of like what the hell does it have to do with anything to do with sport, like think about if you I don't know, line break, or even look at soccer, right? When you're sprinting down the field, the goalie kicks one overhead and both players are looking, I can't do that while the mic's here. Both players are looking behind them while they're sprinting. That's a form of upper load dissociation. They're having to sprint in a straight line, but look behind them to track the ball and maintain that speed. While maybe jockeying another player. In rugby, you're making a line break, you fended someone and now you have to maintain the speed, or you see something in front of you, you have to make a decision what you're going to do. You're going to swerve, you're going to step, whatever it is. You're going to be in position to make kicks. Like these are all things that happen in a game that sure you can just keep sprinting in a straight line and improve maximum speed or do curve running or whatever. But at some point there is potentially other things that are going to help with what you call quote unquote game speed, right? That's kind of where a lot of that falls under.
Yeah. It makes me think, well, a couple of things. One, you mentioned Franz Bosch and Graham Morrison never go full Bosch. It's like if you have this meter of go full Bosch, that's the thing I think about is like.
Well, I think full Bosch is no counter movements because of muscle slack.
Got it.
So that would be like full. I believe. I could be wrong.
We should do a survey of coaches with what they believe that term is.
Well, full Bosches, yeah, that should be a good one.
Yeah, but it makes me think too about even the rotation as you go. It's like on one end there is that ability to use just the torso skillfully for a very generalized term, like even out because once you're spinning and running, you're not able to really time up the dissociation necessarily. But in reality, that dissociation probably should already be there, and then maybe that's the next level where it's just. In some ways, I look at it like Cal Dietz talked about this, where like the best hockey players at a Division I school were those that could skate and they could do more while they were skating. Like they could skate and solve math problems, basically. Skating was so automatic, they had mental bandwidth freed up to then do something else on top of that. And I do think about that sometimes with stuff like that, where is it really the exercise entirely, or is it also that the good athlete, can handle more information. If our world is information or sport is information, well, a better athlete should be one who can process that information better and ideally handle more of it. And maybe the best movers are those who can handle more internal information.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting, which I would say I'm much more the latter than the one who can handle all the information on the field really well. I'm more of the internal. I like the internal information, but for fun, I like doing like in just warm-ups, just my own training. I like bouncing like I have a ball, it's called a cue ball, and it's got little numbers on it, and it bounces subtly randomly. It's not like crazy, like, the reaction balls that you throw it, and it just takes.
Yeah, you can never get them because they're gone down the creek.
Chance. It's just like sometimes you have a chance, but usually you don't have a chance. And I like, staying on one leg and throwing it and adding up and doing math and that kind of thing. And I think to myself, like, I would be curious to try this with more a bigger audience, just and how far does just being able to do things generally, take you? I don't know, but my thought is I wonder if it's the greater principle of just people who are good athletes. They can handle more information. They have more bandwidth to learn. They have more bandwidth to self-organize too, just to learn on their own. You just give them a constraint. Maybe they have more bandwidth to just soak that in. whereas someone who doesn't, they just, ended up a little bit of a step behind with it.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, that self-organization stuff is, I mean, that's been a big part of a lot of, I guess, my philosophy and a lot of coaching as well. Just less of the dictating, telling what to do, and using more constraints to try and at least get something out of whatever it is happening. Yeah.
Yeah. You so back to the oscillatories just a little bit, because I did want to ask you this in terms of fighting. And it is interesting. I love how you mentioned things show up under, I don't know if it was before or after we pushed record, but things will show up under different names periodically. Like it's like, oh, that training thing was really cool 10, 20 years ago. I know here it is again, but now it's like a different set of rules or things like that. And it was interesting you mentioned the Vern Gambetta, like the lunge sequence with the med ball. Were those because I watched that a few maybe like 3 months ago or something like that. I was just watching some old Vern videos that were floating around, and it was actually interesting because an athlete that struggled with the dissociation on the subtle level, which I would say if you're hugging a ball, it's very much, it's the most internalized form of dissociation you can do because it's high sensory. The turn is happening more internally than externally. But whereas having a ball and having a big range of motion, you can be moving your arms. Your rib cage has to move, but it might not be as much as if you're actually bringing it in. But I started doing that as well with a particular athlete who struggled, because I was like, all right, well, why not do more of it? It can't hurt. It's all the same ballpark for sure. And so, yeah, I found those videos. Those videos are so good too. I was like, man, all this stuff floating around the internet, who knows what we end up watching, these old Vern Gambetta, like multi-lunge, like it's really good stuff. I was using that to help augment the just running with the ball type. It's actually more fundamental. I feel like if you brought a bunch of young athletes up with that type of lunge matrix patterning, by the time you gave them a ball, it'd be a lot more innate to them for sure.
Even if you look at like the old Chris Corfus videos, I don't know if he still has them. I know I mentioned to you the other week, but that's kind of what really kind of connected, I guess, a lot of the Bosch stuff to actual training without actually saying anything around Bosch. And he had like it was like a whole series of drills and progressions for like A skips, A marches, various sprint drills, but dissociating upper and lower body. So it was like push and pull with the arms while switching the legs, or hands on the heads and doing A runs, but then like twisting the upper body as you go through. And it's all perfect low level stuff you can do. I use that always as like progressions through, because it makes a great warm up if you're going into speed stuff, but then also attacks the upper lower dissociation work at the same time. It's just like, it's a win-win.
Yeah. I like the ones with the medicine ball and the rotation, like the A's, and high knees. It's like, it's just a tighter format of it, really. With the fighting, this is what I was going to get onto was, I know you've talked about different martial art and fighting practices as having different needs. And I think about like the Marinovich system, I think about a lot. Just probably because it's so different. I also worked with Gary a day, Marinovich in Central California. And I mean, Marv and Gary hated weightlifting, to my understanding. And then, so it's
based on their content, you could probably make that assumption.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I always wondered to myself, like, why does someone grow to hate like a thing, right? Like, and I was reading a little bit about Marv's background, because Marv used to do a ton of weightlifting, and I think he wrecked himself like doing it. And I think even his son, I think for a time may have done too much. The infamous Todd Marinovich. The video I think is like called "How to Be the Worst Sports Dad of All Time" on YouTube. It's like the worst sports dad of all time. So, but I think there's like some catastrophic things that happened because of overuse of that with both him and I think his son, and so they ended up just going completely against it. But like a ton of stuff they do on the physio ball, and then with those little water balls, they're like 9 inches or 10 inches wide, and they weigh like 2 to 3 pounds. You fill them up with water, and it's all based on just whippy stuff, like whipping the arms across the chest or putting a water ball in the blood.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It's all whipping. There's a lot of in the old Pro Bod X book, which was Marv, Edith Hoyce. I think even Gavin McMillan makes a cameo. Like Gavin McMillan's like in the book demonstrating stuff. It's a wild book. Like I went back and reread it like a month ago, and but they talk about the same thing. Like they call it just reversal. Like the advanced version of their exercises is reversal, so it's oscillating. And I was thinking about something you said, like there's certain forms of fighting that don't require as much strength and mass. And I look at like what Nick Curson did, like taking a lot of that stuff.
Mm.
So with like the oscillatory work, it makes me wonder, is there types of fighters that would benefit more from just not doing as much strength work, like that system kind of upholds? And where do you think that kind of system fits in with the needs of a combat athlete?
Mm. I think, well, I guess if we want to define it broadly, I mean, you mentioned obviously reactive stuff, but that system also, I guess you could say, is like almost like fast eccentric overload kind of style. I guess you could say a lot of the work. So yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is much more applicable in the kind of that striking space. That kind of high velocity work. I mean, you're looking at like eccentric specific adaptations out of there, like structurally, morphologically as well, that are going to facilitate speed, right? Like, think like increased muscle fascicle length, which is obviously an important one structurally, better tendon stiffness, or the whole host that most people know. So in those instances, I think it fits better there. Within like grappling and stuff, probably not. I mean, within grappling, you've got like infinite time to do something. You're lying on someone, pushing on their arm or something like that. There's strength and mass in that sport is such a big advantage. Like, I think that's why there's so many, if you look online now, so many creators in that space, like pushing a big bodybuilding or big strength kind of philosophy because it works. I mean, if you're really good at jiu-jitsu and you're also like 100 kilos shredded and can bench like 315 and all that kind of stuff, I mean, yeah, you're going to be an absolute menace on the mats. But take that same person and put them in, say, boxing, kickboxing stuff, that same advantage isn't quite there anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just because of the nature of the sports. So yeah, within that system specifically, yeah, definitely more applicable in those areas. I think more people should be doing more like eccentric overload, especially in those sports because of those adaptations. I mean, I know you're a fan of a flywheel as well. Like the flywheel is easily the most accessible way of doing that. Obviously, it's a little more expensive depending on what you're getting, but your ability to safely eccentric overload, and for some reason, just anecdotally from myself and a bunch of people I've talked to, you just don't get the same soreness. Like the soreness does not come from the flywheel like you would. So if you went and did 110% eccentric overload back squats, like you're gonna be wrecked. And I would argue most fighters aren't at that level to be able to do that anyway, because that's a very advanced variation. Go into a flywheel and say you're either modifying the way that you're doing the braking action. So maybe you're stopping halfway during the eccentric, so it pulls you down only the bottom half. You get this huge spike in peak eccentric force there. Or maybe you're doing an eccentric motor where it's pulling you down. Like you're still getting an eccentric overload because you're maximally pushing up, and then obviously on the way down it's more. But you just don't get the same soreness. So it's something you can kind of do, I guess, week to week without having to beat yourself up and actually be able to train. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing a lot of the eccentric stuff. Even fast eccentric work, even if you don't have a flywheel, like drop catches. Drop catches are epic for a lot of different stuff. Drop catch inverted rows, single leg, like what do you call kickstand or B stance, RDLs. Even on the glute ham raise, that was another one. So that's single leg glute ham raise, and you can drop catch holding a bar, drop the bar and pick that up if you're doing like hamstring stuff. Yeah, there's a ton of like fast eccentric where you can do, and that fast eccentric stuff doesn't seem to beat you up as much either. Compared to like if you're just doing massive absolute loads. So yeah, there's a few different ways to go about it. And I think if for striking specifically, if traditional strength training is maybe up to a certain point, right? If someone's like weakest person has been in the gym, traditional lifting, cool. But at some point, maybe you're looking at doing more eccentric overload stuff because you're trying to target more of those speed adaptations. You may be doing more of the oscillatory stuff, or maybe more of the jump speed power quote unquote work because you're looking at activation, relaxation. Maybe you're doing more sprint interval stuff as well because you're looking at activation, relaxation, calcium sensitivity, a whole host of stuff. But anything to help facilitate that speed without having to be like, I just need to deadlift 500 pounds, because at some point it's not going to further push you and will eventually just take you more time, more volume, and more recovery to be able to get there.
Yeah. The thing with the flywheel that I think is interesting, I was just talking, Paul Cater has been using flywheels and Versa pulleys for decades. And he was just saying this, and I was confirmed it with me. He's like, I never get sore using this. And it is interesting to think about, something that is marketed as eccentric. But what do you think about this? Because I had heard somebody say that, and I will say this, yeah, you have to be very active during the eccentric because however hard you pull on it, it's going to pull back.
Yeah.
But I've heard people mention it's more of a constant tension device than it is necessarily an eccentric in the sense.
It depends how you use it.
Yeah. Like if you have someone like, I've seen Chris Corfus videos where he'd be like pulling the handle up and assisting, and then of course it's going to yank you down harder. That for sure. But yeah, well, tell me a little bit about that because I am curious your take on that constant tension versus.
Yeah, there's definitely concentration. That's one of the big selling points is you have no dead spots. So if you're squatting, right, the bottom's the hardest, the top's the easiest. On a flywheel, it's just all the hardest. So it's just like it just like pulls you down. But yeah, regarding the actual eccentric, people will say it's not eccentric overload because it gives you the same as what you put concentrically. But you can modify the way you either do the concentric or the eccentric to be able to create the overload. So you mentioned obviously the pulling up. So you can actually just do a hand supported as well. So you can go like hand supported on the way up as you like use your arms and then let go on the way down. I've got a video where I do that, but then do 2 up, 1 down. So like 2 legs up, let go, and then 1 leg down. That's it's brutal. You can modify. So for example, you can do deadlift, then Romanian deadlift. So deadlift on the way up for the speed, and then Romanian deadlift on the way down to overload hamstrings. That's a cool variation. That's a little harder, but that's a cool variation. And then you can just delay the braking action where you on the eccentric. So instead of resisting from the very top, you kind of go up and then you kind of like rush your way down. So you kind of like halfway or wherever. And then when the load hits, you've only got half the eccentric phase to go. So you're getting all the impulse you created from the concentric, but only in half the eccentric portion. So you're getting this huge spike at that bottom position. Or you could just kind of hold it at the top and try to break it as quickly as possible. I guess you could do that too. So those are like different ways you can create the eccentric overload. Obviously, with Exafly in particular, they're the ones who have the eccentric motor. So you can just like crank the percentage up to, they changed it now. They used to have up to 80%. And then obviously some people went a bit crazy. I think only goes to 30% now, I think, on their new models. But you set that up and it's going to pull you down X percentage more than you went on the way up. And the idea is with flywheel training anyway, that every rep is maximal. So it's like doing like the last rep of your set of 5 squat multiple times in a row, as an example.
Yeah. It makes me think about like a few years back, Tesla cars had this like ludicrous mode that you could turn on. And flywheels have like this ludicrous mode. It's like everyone wants to do it. I've been using the Beyond Power Voltra the last few months and I love it. And it has a very similar like setting. Like you can set it so it has like a chains mode. So as you pull to the end, it gets harder. And then eccentric, you can set the pullback. So it pulls back however hard you want. And the fun thing with that stuff, I'm realizing more and more, for me, I don't look at it so much as what adaptations exactly is the eccentric causing. I mean, to a degree, yes, but a lot of it to me, it's like, this is alive. Like it's not, I look at it more like that. It's like a constant problem to solve. As I'm going back, the resistance changes. So I just have to stay active with it. It's not like I'm just doing 10 reps. I'm doing 10 reps where I'm like kind of fighting something. And to me, I mean, I know the physiology is helpful too, but I'm always so concerned with just like the mental state and engagement. And I can't help but think with the flywheel stuff and the not soreness. Well, I was going to ask you, do you get sore at all when you do like those 1 up, 2 down or 2 up, 1 downs, or still no?
Oh, I did that a long time ago. So, but not really, because I'm not going all the way down on that single leg one. I'm kind of like a half single leg squat, I guess you could say.
Gotcha.
And like another one I really like is like this power split squat variation. So it's like a top half. I guess you could call it an oscillatory split squat in the top position, but like hold the rail, and then you just go up and down in this top part position, and you can do it with the eccentric overload too, which is absolutely crazy. And it's like a speed squat, and you're having to pump the brakes in this like short time frame at the top. But if you're looking for like quote unquote specific strength to whatever, that's a cool one just because it's like that very top part of the movement. You're having to reverse that movement damn quickly.
Yeah. The only reason what I was going with was like the soreness piece is my theory is that if you have more control if you're more actively engaged with every inch of the range with whatever you're doing, my thought is
Mm,
that those little passive yanks that cause the soreness are gonna be diminished because you're with the thing more closely for a greater percentage.
mm,
That's kinda my theory of it all. Like, and I get the same kinda thing with, like, a beyond power cable. Like, there's just something where you're kind of with the thing. There's more control over
yeah,
the range versus just, "Hey, just take." I mean, you're still controlling a barbell or a dumbbell, but it's not the same.
yeah.
It's not kinda like that bilateral type control, and so that's where even to the point where to go back to Probot X, it's just funny rereading stuff from the past, man. Like, I wanna build out a huge, and it's funny that books written in 2000 are, like, old now, but they are. 'Cause I've talked, actually, I've mentioned to, like, Dan John and Vern Gambetta, like, "Hey, what are some old books? If I'm building a library, what should go in these places?" And I wanna build that out because you read some of this stuff, it's so good and it just pops up again. But one of the things that they're really into, it's like, I suppose because Marv got burned by resistance training so bad, or formal, they're just gonna get it a different way. They're gonna do super cat stuff, like you said, fast eccentrics, like a super cat where they're like throwing you down or help. It's just a faster eccentric in so many ways, but they do a lot of partner resisted too. And now some people I've found that partner resisted is similar in the sense that I do a lot of workouts with like ropes. Like I take the flow rope. There's the two sides of the flow rope. You got the fun, hippie, flowy side.
Yep.
You're in the moment. You're just kind of hanging out. And then you can turn around and you can use it to do buys and tries with a partner. And like, jailhouse style or whatever, or
Yep.
rows or whatever. And interestingly enough, I find if you're at least like pretty trained, like, if you're detrained and you do it, you're going to be sore. But if you're pretty trained, you can go really hard on like the resisted, partner resisted, assisted stuff and really not be sore. And my theory again is I think there's something with the fine micro control that has to go into every piece of that. And I like just thinking about, well, you know what, if you have a partner, you can make your workout so much
Mm.
lighter. It can be, and the flywheel is kind of like your partner that is a machine. It's like a human, kind of. It's not entirely, but it kind of is. It's like, yeah, if you have a partner, use the partner. Like,
Mm,
you can both make each other better with like that. Yeah, it's just something with that, like, constantly
yeah.
piece. So,
I took that to the extreme, uh, maybe 2018. So that the 1080 Quantum has like a isokinetic setting and an eccentric version. So I hooked it up to an iron neck. So I had the iron neck on my head,
man.
and I was like, I'm gonna do eccentric overload neck training because I was like, hey, eccentric specific adaptations. I'm gonna have faster contracting muscles, whatever, it can help potentially with uh, concussion, whatever happens in sport. So I had it on 40 kgs in the front like this, and I just like push the button and it starts pulling my neck forward, and I have to resist, and then press stop. Same thing laterally, and I was like, I think I'm gonna be like paralyzed tomorrow.
Oh,
There's no way. Yeah. But then no soreness, nothing. I mean, I was doing a lot of jiu-jitsu at the time, but still, like, I had no soreness, nothing, and I was like, I don't know how that's even possible. Like, I was literally like in a position like with my head like this, and the rope just like pulling my head this way with eccentric overload, and, and I was like, just wanted to test it out, but it was all good. So, I mean, I wouldn't advise anyone listening to this to just go do that, but
yeah,
you
no,
know,
I think if I went and did it, I would be in trouble. But it's such the opposite extreme in the sense of, if it's controlled and the body has constant feedback loops, it's safe, in that sense.
mm,
You can do so much versus, I think back to, somebody rear-ended me when I was like 23. I was just sitting at a stoplight and someone crashed
mm,
30 miles an hour and just like, like minor whiplash, nothing crazy. But the next day, my neck was like, those muscles were like
yeah,
so sore, like all the muscles in my neck. It's like the purest of a force you do not impose on yourself that you're not controlling and working with, of the microsecond. Um, yeah, I just think it's so interesting to see the difference between those two. Is there any other work you've done with I don't aim to make this like a super tech specific show by any means. I do like exploring an overview of the different methods. And I will say, if
yeah,
you are listening and you have no tech, I love partner rope stuff because I think the aliveness is actually somewhat
mm,
similar to a wheel, just in that sense that I described. But yeah, I'm curious with like a 1080 Quantum or anything that's more mechanized of a barbell.
mm.
What have you noticed how that compares to a flywheel type device?
Um, well, it's harder to use in a group setting, so you probably wouldn't use it in a group setting. One thing I did try, I was just playing around with. This is actually because everyone's in Austin, so I was lucky enough that I was at one of the guys' houses, but we tied the rope. So I was like, okay, I wonder if there's a way you could do like eccentric hard, like bear hug rotations. So like again, eccentric overload, tie the rope around the bag. I would bear hug it, and I would be like turned away, and then would set the eccentric overload to pull the bag back, and I'm like resisting the entire time as it pulls me back around. And I was like, that like I could the transfer I could imagine to anyone who's in a wrestling grappling sport, even rugby, would be huge to be up. Like you're literally just maximum force or maximum tension as you're in these positions, and just like trying to like resist yourself being moved throughout the entire thing. So that's one other application I've tried. Another one I tried was actually doing it with the player who had some hamstring problems. So we put him on a slide board, and this was a lot harder. I don't know if this one was actually any good, but he would hold something behind him, and he would be in a single leg like bridge position. So heel on the ground, legs bent. We had an ankle cuff on him, and then we'd essentially get the quantum to pull his ankle forward and extend his knee. So he's like doing like it's almost like basically a Nordic, but on his back single leg. And we tried about that. That was a lot harder because obviously you're kind of like bracing yourself above your head to not have your body get pulled along. But again, that's another. I guess I just like playing around with shit like that. So it was just interesting to just kind of see, if that was something else that could potentially. But I think a lot of these machines, like one of the best applications are in the eccentric overload stuff because you're limited with traditional lifting where you either have to do super heavy loads, multiple spotters, or weight releases, and all sorts else. And it's a lot harder for a lot of people to do. And I'd argue a little more dangerous too for most people compared to using some of these. But obviously, there's huge limitations with with expensive machines.
Yeah, for sure. There was I saw a flywheel leg curl that Paul Cater had. And he said it was his favorite for like, if you had one for team sport, it was the ultimate hamstring. And I was just thinking with what you said with the soreness, because it complained about things like Nordic hamstrings and whatnot, which I like them. But I think if you are not responsible with how you progress and apply them, you can definitely put more noise in the system and create a little soreness or a little discoordination in that area. And yeah, if you're asked to sprint a lot on the field explosively, which you are, I could see that potentially being an issue. But if you could do a flywheel leg curl that delivers a very strong stimulus in a similar way and probably more controlled through the whole range. I know that's a complaint with the Nordic is like you'll do it and you're really only getting it.
You fall partway through.
Yeah. Or I mean, if you do assisted, you get it you get it pretty much all the way down. You hold the band, you can hold a band and then you can lift it up to help yourself back and those things. There's definitely better ways to do a Nordic, I feel like, than just hold someone's feet and just see what they can do type thing. But yeah, that flywheel, just that with the soreness and then even, if you could overload that eccentric, you could like do 2 up, 1 down, or you could push it. That seems like it would just be something that would be superior but again, if you got 30 players and you got one
flywheel device,
you got to make it a circuit or something. I don't know how you're going to pull that one off. I want to see you do a neck exercise with a flywheel, like lying on a bench.
That would work. That would be good.
That would be.
I need you. Exafly, send me some stuff.
Yeah.
Then we'll go.
Please post. Yeah. I wanted. Okay, so I want to close this out, and unfortunately, I don't think we'll get to the games today. I was like, oh man, I got these great. And
just hit me with the game stuff. I'll run through it if you like. Well, or we can go part 2.
I would say, yeah, maybe we'll save that for a part 2 because I really want to get into like the rhythm change pieces because that's not something people talk about often. I've seen the work you do there. So good. But let's cap this out. I think this question will be a good summation of a lot of the speed and power stuff, just both fighting and in general. So whether it be a field sport or fighting, and maybe this fits with the oscillatory piece, but I wanted to ask you what is studying striking power in fighting taught you about power universally?
I like that one. I like this one. This is I've done some posts on this recently and some videos on it recently as well on the YouTube channel and stuff. I think because there's a disconnect between what happens at impact and I guess the generation of the fourth generation of the movement. So I think a lot of people look at it it was like a basic physics equation where it's like, okay, force equals mass times acceleration. If I accelerate faster into contact as a rugby player, or my fist accelerates faster into a target, that means I'm going to be producing more force, and that means, hey, I'm going to line break tackles, knock some out, whatever. But the problem is, it doesn't take into account that the body isn't a uniform mass. If you were a fucking fridge, yeah, you can probably plug it in there. But we have more than just hard, I guess, rigid structures like the skeleton, muscles, tendons, etc. So if anyone is really interested in this stuff, if you just look up Seth Linetsky's work, and just effective mass, you'll find it. Probably one of the leading punch researchers, done some really cool work out of AUT at home there in the boxing and punching space, but kind of really carries over well to other contact sports. And it's this idea of impact force. And there's a new paper that just came out recently, or maybe it was in 2020, I think it was, where essentially effective mass was the strongest predictor of punch impact force. And effective mass is just basically how much momentum you can impart into the target. So if you think about, I guess you could say, I think Bruce Lee was the one talking about stiffening at the target at impact and being relaxed beforehand. It's that would be the visualization. And the idea is that the more rigid you are at impact, the more of that momentum you can impart and more of that impulse you can impart onto the target. And I've got some really cool graphs with punches that kind of show this in action as well on a video. But basically, if you see I'll give two quick visualizations that might help. First one will be punching, like a snappy, maybe point karate style punch where you're kind of trying to almost quote unquote tapping someone, versus say a knockout punch in boxing where you're almost punching through the target. Those two have very distinct impulse graphs where you see the snappy punch have this really high peak acceleration, but there's really sharp deceleration on the other side. Whereas punching through has the peak acceleration doesn't go as high, but you have a longer follow through. And because you have the larger area under the curve, you have more impulse. More impulse equals more momentum, and you typically just have more going to the target. With another easy example would be swinging a pool noodle. If you swing a pool noodle at someone, it doesn't matter how hard you're swinging it, you're going to have the pool noodle is going to deform at impact. It's going to wrap around the person. You have a lot of deformation. You swing a baseball bat at someone, that ain't happening, right? Because it's rigid. When it makes impact, it's a rigid structure. You're transferring all that momentum into the target. And it's the same thing when you're running into contact. It's the same thing when you're delivering a strike. That rigidity at impact is what's going to help transfer that momentum. And it's not specifically how fast or how hard you throw the punch or run into contact, but it's how hard you hit the contact. Really easy example as well, in rugby. There are some guys, and I think this kind of explains the difference between people who aren't gym strong, but the animals on the field. Everyone's come across that.
Yeah.
Or when you they're just dense, right? You go to tackle someone or you're grappling with someone, their hips and their body is just like granite when you hit them. And
yes.
And I'm sure it comes down to something like this ability to, when they're in contact, they have this ability to be rigid. Whereas coaches will often try and teach this as well, because some people go into contact, they'll lose their feet, right? They'll kind of hit contact and fall to the ground. And you kind of become what is coined, quote unquote, wobbling mass, where anything outside of the rigidity kind of makes that collision less effective. So, and in those cases, when you're maybe hitting contact, then just falling and not pushing through with your feet, or kind of having that tension at contact, you're losing a lot of that momentum to be imparted into the contact. And since we know my physics is rusty, but anyway, but as momentum is always conserved anyway, it's got to go somewhere. And if it's just wobbling, quote unquote, mass, you're kind of just losing it. So power development, strength development, speed development, all good. You need that side of the equation. It's important to have. We can also talk about the phenomenon in elite strikers where they have this double peak muscle activation, where it's kind of again, activation, relaxation. It's activation, relaxation as they throw to facilitate the speed, and then again, activation and impact, which is that effective mass tension at the end of it. Having some of that is important, but that rigidity at contact is where, I guess, is where collision performance is. And to train that specifically, often it's just down to doing the sport more and longer. Like if you're hitting the heavy bag for 10 plus years and you've been boxing a long time, you probably developed a lot of that skill because it is a skill as well. But there are probably things you could be doing in training to potentially at least help facilitate some of the improvements in that. And I mean, as striking, it could just like hitting the heavy bag more is going to be like your number one thing. Potentially doing like end range isometrics, like for example, like at the end of a jab and kind of pushing. I don't know if that's going to transfer well, but it might at least like give the feeling. Like, I think the kind of feeling thing and transferring over is always a good thing. So if you did that and then did maybe heavy bag work, maybe within like rugby and stuff and collision, again, it might be a technical thing where people are losing their feet in contact and having them actually hit contact and continue pushing through. And then obviously just potentially as a confidence thing too, right? People talk about people with handbrakes going into contact and stuff like that. So potentially it's a confidence thing. Maybe it is squatting more weight and they get bigger and they feel more confident going into contact. So, everything's integrated. Nothing's kind of isolated as we know. But yeah, that's kind of been big ones where it's kind of like, yeah, we can improve power development. We can be faster, bigger, stronger. But what is happening at impact to be able to transfer all this new force and momentum and impulse and everything else into that target? Because if you don't have that, then all the work you've done anyway isn't, I'm not going to say not going to matter. It's not going to at least transfer that well to that kind of performance outcome. But, you have your other performance benefits from being bigger, faster, stronger as well. So it's not to say not to do it. Just want to make that clear.
Yeah. The way you talked about the punch, James, it made me think about, my mind goes to like, what is this? What's the sprinting or jumping similarity here?
Yeah, hitting the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And but it's
I
interesting.
think that's where the effective mass model comes from. I think Seth took it from sprinting and applied it to boxing, I believe.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, so sprinting, managing collisions, and every collision, as a Darian Barr would say, will have a crumple zone. Like, you have to have your ankle and foot, although having strong, or you could use the word stiff. That probably doesn't describe what actually happens, but strong feet that don't deform much is important in sprinting. But you have to have some crumple. You have to have some internal rotation at the ankle when the foot strikes, or some bone's going to snap eventually. Plus, the foot needs to twist to be able to direct momentum forward subtly. It's not like it's like a lot, but there's something. And so, but it is that big wind up, like the knees up, the foot is dropping down. There's going to be a lot of things at play, but eventually that foot drops from a high to low position, has a collision. And movement, I like that. It's funny because a lot of people would see this and think it's kind of dumb just because it's not normal, but it's a Jay Schrader movement. This was not in the Adam Archuleta Freak of Training, as far as I know, video. But I think the term is altitude drop legs, where you're staying on a box. It's 20 inches high, or 70, 60 centimeters or 50 centimeters. And you stand on it like the Karate Kid. So you don't just stand on it like a normal depth jump where you kind of step off and fall. It's, you have a knee real high, and then you step off and you bring the knees up together in space, and then you shoot everything down and hit the collision. And so it's kind of the idea, the same thing as, hey, instead of just dropping and absorbing, you're going to drop with a windup. And I don't think that makes for the best reversal, because it's just too much noise. Like, if you were going to do a depth jump and do it over another hurdle, it's probably not necessarily ideal to do that because it's too noisy to reverse it. But just to stop, like you're stopping that punch, like on a heavy bag or something, it actually, the feeling of that, there's a lot more of that punch-esque feeling. I think that's where that combination of, like, Jay Schrader's the juice warm up, do a lunge for 2 or 3. If you're really crazy with it, 5 minutes. But I think you and I are settled in the 2 to 3 minute range, or somewhere in there.
Or less.
Depends. Yeah, I do. These days, I take it easy on myself. I usually go like 1:30 to 2. 2 is like long these days, actually, just because I'm like, I've done this enough, man. Like, it's just, I need to have some stillness, some consistency in that front end, like there. But yeah, I find too, if I do 3 or 4, I will find ways to actually make it less quality sometimes. Like, maybe it's like Parkinson.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's Parkinson's law or there's a different law, but like what you do fits for the time frame. So if it's like 2 minutes, I'm going to be better technically, and be better with my breathing. It's going to be a better quality movement. Anyways, not to get on a rabbit trail, but do the lunges, and then you do 20, 30, 40 of those altitude drop legs, it makes sense why you're pretty ready to go after that if you sprint outcomes or whatever it is. And it's like you make space with the lunge, you get some muscle energetics going, some temperature, and then you're doing these like ballistic, like punch to stops. And yeah, like you're going to be pretty juiced to go after that. So, but I was trying to think, well, what's the equivalent of the punch that goes all the way through? Like I saw a video of some guy, like he's doing like a 1-inch punch. He's being taught by like the old master. And like he goes through the paper. It's like he's got his finger like a part of the paper, and it's just like lightning goes through all the way through the paper, right? But that's not the ground. So I was like, well, what's the equivalent of that? And I mean, honestly, maybe like straight leg speed bounding a little bit, even, but you still have a pretty good collision.
I mean, I guess even just your typical hurdle hop exercise, even though you still have a bit of knee bend, but I mean, that's pretty much it. I think it just comes from that spring mass model. The spring mass model turned into punching. So I'm sure there'll be a bunch of stuff on that already. I just haven't gone into it.
Yeah. Oh, the thing that just popped in my head would be like a speed low lunge where you're kind of low to the ground. You see in wrestling, like those guys doing the duck walk, like speed across the mat. Maybe that's it a little bit where there's no, the follow through is much looser and longer. You know what I'm saying? Like those like speed, quick, low lunges. Maybe that's it. But yeah, going off and I do think just like that interdisciplinary connection, like sometimes it's hard to understand something fully until you understood it in its real authentic context. I feel like that's the most authentic you can get was that straight line punch. And the last thing I'll just mention with this and that universal piece, and I know New Zealand, that neck of the woods, Angus Ross was really interested in this, and I still am as per his interest, but Alan Wells, the 1980 100-meter champion, dash in the Olympics, and he did just a ton of speed bag, like just in the winter, in wherever he was, Scotland, or you can't go out and sprint, but they did a lot of that, but that's interesting because that speed bag, you're going through it, you're not, but that's kind of what your hands do in sprinting. It's the feet that deal with the collision more so. So maybe there's something there with that. I don't know. I don't know.
I talked to Angus about that on the podcast too. He was a big influence on my master's thesis topic with the overshoot stuff. So, he lots of smart stuff coming out of New Zealand for sure.
Yeah. I definitely the 1-inch punch stuff is really. I wish I had a bag here. I would just I'd do a little bit.
You'll be doing that in between podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's save games for a part 2, James.
Right.
I'm super excited about that one, and just the speeds of rhythm. I'm really looking.
Yeah, we'll cover some different pieces on there, and we'll do 4 weeks in a row.
Yeah. Let's. So in the meantime, if people want to find you and what you're up to, where do they go to learn more about your work?
Go to Sweet Science of Fighting on Instagram and on YouTube. Those would probably be the best. Those would be the best places, I think. I do a bunch of stuff. Like I've been writing research reviews for Science for Sport for almost 8 years now, if anyone's interested in that stuff. And then if you're into more like general weightlifting stuff, Lift Big, Eat Big will be the other place to find a lot of the stuff. That's more strength sports, general fitness orientated. Oh, if you remember back in the day, that was like a big fitness brand. We acquired it in 2021. Like when blogs were massive, when you used to just read your RSS feed of all the blogs. Lift Big, Eat Big was like one of those. So I was like, I didn't want to see it die, so we acquired that. But that's more weightlifting based. And that should be it. Lift Big, Eat Big, Sweet Science of Fighting, and then Science for Sport, basically.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for chatting today, James. I'm looking forward to part 2, and I'm looking forward to trying some new stuff on my flywheel as well.
Yeah.
So
That's perfect. No, cheers for having me on.